Okay, so we're talking about how to do input validation in a GUI world. First of all, there's no loop here. So you can't, before we just had to ask you the question over and over and over. Can't do that here because we're hitting a submit button and you're trying to verify that all the data is good to go before we submit it to some database or whatever the hell submit actually does. And there's no scanner class, so therefore I couldn't possibly use that horrible technique they have in the book that I never wanted you to use anyway. Remember? Okay, the get int, get double, those kind of things. I don't ever like those guys, or next int rather. Next int, next double. I never wanted you to use those. I always wanted to use parse. Okay, there was a reason, and so the reason is if you learn it with this one way, you're okay. All right, cool beans. Now, the alert type is kind of weird. The alert type basically controls that little icon. All right, so let me just show you one more time. I'll have to force this thing to pop up with an alert. So I get a little red X that says, this little icon is dependent on what type of alert. Now I'm going to go in here and put in something like information. Okay? Now the icon is not going to be a red background with an X through it. It's going to be something that basically says, hey, it's going to be like an eyeball. That's what that thing's called. And if you put in a warning, it'll pop up a hand, that kind of stuff. So this enum controls the icon that shows up. Isn't that pretty cool? Okay. Now, to tell you the truth, again, using alerts is very intrusive. And so you probably need to come up with another way of doing that. And a better way of doing it is to have like a text, a form with a field in there where you can just write messages, okay? But we're not ready to do that now. I'm just saying, so for now, we're doing alert. Now, on page 803, they start talking about a thing called anonymous classes. Now, do you recall that this was rather annoying? First of all, I have to write an inner class, okay? A class is inside a class. And there are some bizarre rules about you can only have one public class. You can't have two public classes per, there's a lot of weird stuff. Plus, I had the issue with this dang thing being at the wrong scope. So there's another technique called an anonymous class. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Instead of doing the thing that we did before about this, okay, I'm going to comment this guy out because that's the old way. And this time I'm going to do it all in line. It's all going to be in here. And it looks kind of funny, so just let me get it started. So submit, set, on, event handler, So this part is pretty straightforward, right? Except instead of saying new, I'm going to tell it I want to just start typing the code here. So I'm going to say new, and instead of giving it the name of a class, I'm going to give it the actual name of the interface. Now, this is a little weird, okay? Because you might think to yourself, wait a minute, are you saying I can create instances of interfaces? And it's like, yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. But yeah, you can do that. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to do a new event handler, and then I have to tell it what type it's going to be. And this one is going to be the same old one we did before, the action event. Now this up to here, this looks pretty normal, right? I mean, this thing, right? Kind of, sort of normal. And so I do this for my new, and then I just hit the carriage, hit the carriage return and start putting in code right here. Oh, helps if you spell handler right. Okay. So instead of typing this stuff, I'm just going to go down here and grab the guts of this thing. So the guts of it is this one method, right? I'm just going to grab this one method, Control C. I'm going to go back up to here. I'm going to put my cursor right there, and I'm going to do Control V. Okay, so now what I've done is I've created this thing inside. It's called an anonymous class, where I actually write the code inside that line. This line 66 actually doesn't end until line 98. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and try to indent this guy a little bit to make him look a little bit better. Right? Like this. That's how this thing would kind of sort of look in real life. Cool? Now, because I did that, now I don't have to use this goofy thing up here, because I don't have to worry about the thing not having the right kind of scope. So I'm going to put this back to the way this was, and I'm going to comment this guy out. Okay, so everything should work exactly the way it was before, except now I just made it a little bit easier. I don't need this guy down here anymore. I can make this guy go away. I'm just going to comment this guy out. Oops, sorry. Okay, now let's run this, make sure I didn't goof. Me? Make a mistake? No, that's not possible. So we need to talk philosophically about what we just did. The age field cannot be blank. All right, so what did I accomplish with all that? Okay, well, so from a philosophical point of view, it makes it easier to see, at least in my opinion, easier to see what it is I'm actually doing. Because all of the code remains inside the original class. I don't have to have a subclass, okay? So I didn't have to move items up in scope. That's an advantage. I didn't have to write a separate inner class. That's kind of ugly. I didn't have to use the event handler interface when I was inheriting. Instead of implementing an interface, I just created a class that implemented it that way. And then all the event handlers stay inside start like they belong. I mean, doesn't it make sense just to have the start method here and have everything all packaged together? Doesn't that kind of make sense? And so there's a good way of doing this. So I gave you 4 reasons why I thought this was a good idea. I don't have to move things up in scope. I don't have to write a separate inner class. I don't have to mess with the interface. And all the event handlers are in one place. Lambda expressions, they basically do the exact same thing. I'm going to skip that. Hey, I got to leave something for the advanced class to do, right? All right. So that's about it for this part. So let's go look at what they call the border pane. Now, a border pane is a special type of container because sometimes you just want stuff at the top and maybe stuff at the bottom or maybe on the left. And so they give you this border layout guy to provide like the top level division of where you want things to appear in your application. Kind of makes sense. Now, I will tell you that you don't typically put things directly in these regions. Typically, you would put like an HBox or something else, some sort of a normal traditional container before you put stuff in, and then that container goes inside one of these guys. And so it's going to be like set center, set top, where you just pick something and put it where you want it. Okay. On page 812, they talk about a thing called an observable list. Now that we're in the event-driven world, let's just pretend for a minute that I have an array list of usernames, okay? So it's just an array list with an angle bracket string, okay? And it's just a list there. Well, if I make this thing an observable list, whenever somebody adds something to this list, or takes something away from this list, it fires an event. And I can write an application to listen for this event. That's what an observable list is all about. Now, quite frankly, we typically don't build observable lists necessarily, but you end up using them a lot. For example, if you go back to the text here, remember we were adding all these things? Like this VBox guy, and this has an observable list. So these things are things that you could just put on the command line, or you could use the add command, because on line 100, I'm creating the virtual box. But what if I want, it only has 1, 2, 3, 4 things in it. What if I wanted to put a 5th thing in it? Well, there's one called add, and there's another one called add all. So that's just another technique. I mean, you could go in there and say, I want an HBox. And then, oh, by the way, I'd also need another label and another this and another this by just doing add, or maybe add all to have it. So those are interfaces. The add and the add all are part of what's called an observable list. Okay. Page 814 is the common errors to avoid. And yeah, there's an awful lot of those you probably need to go through. Okay, we're coming to the end now. We're not quite done. I'm going to do one more video. It's going to be a demonstration of how to do a particular layout. So stay tuned.